in just a moment. Joining the table, we have the executive editor of Rolling Stone magazine, Eric Bates. And Rolling Stone is out with a hard-hitting new article on their website this morning on alleged crimes by the so-called U.S. kill teams in Afghanistan. It's a very difficult subject that you may not want kids to hear about. So we'll start there. We're waiting to hear from Richard Engel, and when we get to him, we'll go right to him. But first, let's talk about this article, and I want to just lay it out very carefully here. Yep. Rolling Stone magazine has another very, very big article, breaking news about these kill teams that murdered innocent civilians, mutilated their corpses, and how some officers failed to stop them. First of all, who wrote this article, and what is this reporter's background?
The article is by Mark Bowl. He's probably best known for winning the Academy Award last year for writing the screenplay for The Hurt Locker, but he's also a very accomplished journalist. He's written for us and for others for years, and he knows the territory really well. All
right, so describe what he lays out in this article. I have parts of the article that we're going to read that are very difficult, and again, probably not for kids.
Right.
But first of all, what is this article basically saying happened in Afghanistan with these innocent civilians?
Well, there were a dozen soldiers who were being charged with various crimes relating to the murder of 3 Afghan civilians. These were soldiers who basically went out, just picked unarmed civilians and targeted them for execution, killed them, in some cases mutilated their corpses, cut off parts of their bodies, pinky fingers, kept them for trophies. What we found that was very disturbing was that the crimes may go higher and wider than the Pentagon has so far acknowledged. No officers have been charged yet in these crimes. As far as we know, none have been disciplined or been held accountable in any way for the actions of this unit. What's more is we've obtained some of the photos that the soldiers took of themselves and of their victims, and some of those photos seem to indicate that there may be other crimes involving other platoons that haven't been charged yet. So that's what's most disturbing about it, and that's really why we decided to publish some of these photographs, because it looks like there may be crimes that haven't been prosecuted yet.
I was going to read this. I don't think I'm going to. Will they take it? I'm going to talk with Chris a little bit about whether we do this.
Let's lay out, just take one step back. What is a kill team exactly? Obviously, that's not a term the Pentagon uses.
No,
what is that exactly?
This is a term the soldiers themselves use. They talked amongst themselves for months about killing civilians. What's really disturbing here is this wasn't a one-time massacre. This was more or less a shooting spree that went on over the course of 4 months, where time after time they went out. They picked civilians, they killed them. In a couple of cases, they shot at people in fields and missed. So this was really a kind of a coordinated campaign among these soldiers. And it was a situation where, as best we can tell, there was a lot of indication that the officers had that something was going on. We don't necessarily think that the officers knew what was happening per se. But in the very first kill that they did, they executed a 15-year-old boy who was out in a field farming. The next day, 20 villagers descended on the base demanding an investigation. So very high levels in this battalion knew that something was going on, and yet this group of soldiers was allowed to continue killing for months.
Right. How far up the chain of command do you think knowledge went of what was going on, and how far up the chain of command did the cover-up go, or a cover-up go, once the knowledge came to light?
That's exactly the right question, and that's the question that really the Pentagon, and only the Pentagon, is in a position to answer. We can't tell, but we do know that at least up to the top of the brigade level, they knew that there were protests among the villagers saying that civilians had been executed on at least 2 different occasions, and they didn't do anything about it.
What do you know about the motives of these people and their mental health?
Well, some of them in their defense are claiming drug use, claiming that they were imbalanced. They're trying to pin it on a squad leader and say that he was the ringleader. What we found really is that there was a lot of frustration among this unit. They were out on the front line. They were supposed to be engaging the Taliban, and they basically couldn't find the Taliban. The Taliban was striking them with roadside bombs. They had very, very high casualty levels, and I think it had gotten to the point where there was a combat environment where there was a real hatred of all Afghan people. One of the soldiers said in his testimony to the Army, everybody would say they're savages. Everybody in the unit hated the Afghans. The Afghan National Police, the Afghan Army are allies. So there had developed this real hatred of the very people that we're there to defend.
So what has, how did Rolling Stone get this information, first of all? And what has been the response been? Has there been a denial of murder, a denial of mutilation of corpses? I mean, this excerpt just of what happened to the 15-year-old boy, I don't think I can read.
Yes, it's very...
People can find it in Rolling Stone,
yeah.
But it is horrific what
disturbing.
This article is alleging.
Yeah. Well, we obtained the Army's investigative files, and we obtained 150 or so of the 4,000 photographs that these soldiers took and collected and passed around as war souvenirs. There's not a denial in the sense that some of the individual soldiers are protesting and saying that they're innocent. There are 12 soldiers facing charges. One of them, who killed the 15-year-old boy, was just convicted of murder, 3 counts of murder, last Thursday. He pled for a lesser sentence of 24 years in order to testify against the platoon leader, who they're trying to pin it on. The military has said, basically, acknowledge that it's happening. They're prosecuting 12 of the soldiers. The question is, is it going high enough? Have they gone after the officers?
How does it happen?
And in the piece, Eric, you say that then General Stanley McChrystal was briefed on this last May. We just saw these on Der Spiegel, last week?
That's right.
And in your magazine now. What were the efforts, if any, by the Pentagon to erase these files, to keep them under wraps?
The Pentagon launched a massive effort to keep anyone from ever seeing these photographs. They knew they had another potential Abu Ghraib on their hand. They sent agents fanning out across the United States to confiscate hard drives, to visit relatives' homes who they knew had been given the photographs, and keep them under wraps. General McChrystal was informed. President Karzai was informed of the existence of the photos. In the sealing order, they were placed under a court sealing order. The rationale for doing this was to make sure that the accused their trials wouldn't be affected. But in the sealing order, they also mentioned that this would negatively impact the reputation of the military. So they were very, very concerned about how this was going to reflect on U.S. troops and whether it was going to promote more hostility in Afghanistan.
Were the civilians in the Pentagon made aware that these 4,000 photos were floating around the internet out there in the United States, and did they authorize picking up these photos and confiscating them and getting rid of them?
Yeah, as far as we can tell, yes. That this was widely known in the Pentagon. It's been reported for months that these photos existed. No one had seen them, but everybody knew they were there.
Now, the concern about this negatively impacting the reputation of the military is an obvious one, but what about if the information isn't transparent, that there is a message that this type of behavior is condoned? I mean, how does the reporting of this end up really having an impact if there's an attempt to kind of put it away?
Well, that was our real concern. And in a couple of the photographs that we saw, we have a source that told us there were 2 men tied up by the side of the road after they were dead, a sign placed around their neck saying "Taliban are dead." We have a source that tells us that that was an entirely different unit that did that and said, oh, that's their standard operating procedure. They like to tie up bodies and prop them up by the side of the road after they kill them. Now, those bodies in the photo may in fact have been insurgents or may in fact have been Taliban. As far as we know, it could have been a legitimate combat engagement. But the displaying of the corpses in that manner was clearly a crime. And when we spoke to the Pentagon, they basically shrugged their shoulders and said, after a year, almost a year of having these photographs, said, we don't really have any way of knowing who those men are or how they died.
You know, this was clearly a rogue unit. Were these fellas, this their first tour of duty or their second or third tour of duty? And have you picked up anything that said that because most Americans won't believe that other American soldiers were engaged in that. They're going to believe this is a complete rogue unit. Did you find out any measure of, not of collusion, but any replication of what they were doing by other units?
And how many tours of duty do these?
They were all over the map. The squad leader was a decorated veteran from Iraq, apparently involved in some incidents there that were fairly questionable. Jeremy Morlock, the specialist who was just convicted, it was his first tour. He was really a case where he maybe shouldn't have been in the theater of war to begin with. I think the month before he deployed to Afghanistan, he was charged with disorderly conduct after allegedly burning his wife with a cigarette. So you have a real lowering of standards, of who's in the military, because the military's been so desperate for troops while it's been fighting 2 wars simultaneously. But there is evidence that these soldiers, what was particularly disturbing is they bragged openly about what they were doing. It was really an open secret, not just among their unit, but among other units. The platoon had a reputation for staging killings, and other units knew about it. So that's what's most disturbing. In one case, a particularly disturbing case, after they killed this 15-year-old boy, a few nights later they were playing poker, and they threw the boy's finger in as a bet. And there were other soldiers around and a female medic who hadn't had anything to do with the killing. So it was an atmosphere in which everybody was seen as the enemy, really. All Afghan people were seen as the enemy.
Mark, what can be the impact of pictures like these? We know what the photographs from Abu Ghraib told the world about what we were doing in Iraq. If the idea in Afghanistan is that we're not an occupying force, but we're there to transform the society and help rebuild it. What is the power of a story like this?
I think the power is going to be greater in Afghanistan than it is here. You know, the notion of winning over the hearts and minds of the Afghan people as a force seen by as an occupying force in the wake of pictures like this and a story like this, it makes what was, I think, very, very, very hard impossible.
You know, this goes right back to My Lai, 1968 under Lyndon Johnson. It broke in '69 when we were in the White House. Devastating impact. I know veterans of World War II were just sickened by it. They told me they couldn't believe American soldiers would do that. Now, I guess we're sort of inured to these things happening, but I think it's going to be a hellish blow on policy in Afghanistan. People are going to say, just get out of that place.
It is a huge question being raised, given the fact that we've been in Afghanistan so long, and people are really beginning to grow tired of the amount of blood and everything else that we are sacrificing for a war that we don't understand. Having said that, I don't know if it's worse, but it potentially is just as bad. What you report happening, the fact that there was a reputation around that this unit had, and nothing was said, might be equally as frightening. We're going to talk more about this. I want to hear more about the response from the government, from our military, and how far up this went coming up. We have to now, though, get to our other headline.